So here at the River Center, this aquarium represents our estuary ecosystems. Estuaries are a semi-enclosed body of water that usually connects to land. And here in the Loxahatchee River, our estuaries connect our freshwater forks with our Jupiter Inlet in the Atlantic Ocean. This is where fresh and salt water mix together, creating a brackish environment. And here in our estuaries is where you can find our mangroves, as well as our oyster reefs. So oysters are in the phylum Mollusca. They're a soft-bodied animal and invertebrate with a hard shell. Oysters have to grow, or they find their way down to the bottom of the ground, which is where they then can grow and develop and live. One oyster, about the size of your ear, can filter about 50 gallons a day. Food has to come to the oysters, so they will open up their shells, allowing water to pass through, so where they could collect zooplankton and phytoplankton, filtering out that water as it goes. As you notice, oysters will bond and form together, creating what we call these reefs. Now, if you look at the fish that are in this aquarium, you'll notice they're pretty small. These are juvenile fish species that you would find in the estuary as well as out in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, the reason that they're found inside and around oyster reefs is because it is a good habitat if you're pretty small. A good habitat for juvenile fish species and all animals is you need food, water, shelter, air, and space. And the really important ones for juvenile fish are food and shelter. Now, if you're trying to avoid predators, which is anything that is larger than you, you're going to stick by a structure or a habitat that can provide a lot of hiding spaces. Mangrove roots can provide hiding spaces in and around their roots, and then oyster reefs can help with all those nooks and crannies for them to fit and to hide in. Now, more importantly, and for our oyster reef ecology lab, is their food source. So here, these fish would find different items to eat: oysters itself, barnacles, mussels, as well as algae that will grow on the oyster reefs, and then all of those really tiny primary consumers and decomposers. So things like crabs, shrimp, snails, decaying leaves, plant material. So because their food source is here, they have a habitat that allows them to thrive. And then hopefully most of these fish, as they reach adulthood, will eventually make their way out into the ocean.
So now that you know a little bit more about what oysters are, what makes an oyster, we're going to talk a little bit more about oysters as a habitat. Now, oysters as a habitat, right? We've been talking about that, but now I want to show you, we have taken some oysters right out of the Loxahatchee River, and we've put them into this bag here. Now, this was actually used to do some oyster reef restoration. These shells came from restaurants and other places where just oyster shell was being thrown away as garbage. They were bagged up like this and put into the river. And what happens is that those oyster spat, so the oyster larvae, need a hard place to settle out, and so they settle onto these hard shells and actually grow new reef. But what we also discovered was, because of all the little nooks and crannies in here, we got lots and lots of little animals like crabs and snails and little fish. Okay, so we are going to do what we call an oyster shake, and I'm going to shake these bags and we're going to see what comes out, and hopefully it'll be some really cool stuff. These have been sitting down in the river for several months now, so we should have a nice selection of animals to look at. So what we're looking at today is just a little micro habitat of a larger oyster reef. So as I look into the box here, I also noticed that we have some things that kind of came up with the bags. These are plant materials. So this is a red mangrove propagule. So this is actually a baby tree. It's not a seed. They drop off the mother plant. This is going to be the leaf. This is going to be the roots. And then they kind of float around. And here I have a sea bean. I'm not sure which plant that is from, but it's a seed that floats around on the top of the water until it finds a place to land. And I also have in here, this is a black mangrove propagule. So it looks a little bit different than the red mangrove, but same idea. It's not a seed. It just drops off the mother plant and floats around until it finds a place to start growing. It's an actual tree. Okay, so one of the ways that we get the critters out of these bags is I'm going to shake it gently, and while I do that, we're going to pour some water over it, and that helps to dislodge some of those critters that might be clinging to the different parts of the shell. So I'm going to do that now. I'll do this one too. So we've got this in here. Interesting. So we know we have some snapping shrimp in here. We've been hearing them snap really loud. And one of the cool things about snapping shrimp is that they actually make a bubble of air when they snap their claws closed. And that bubble of air, when it kind of explodes, it actually paralyzes their prey. They get knocked back by the force of this snapping shrimp, and it paralyzes them briefly, and that's how the snapping shrimp can get in there and get his prey to eat. So we're going to try to fish one of these guys out. We've got at least two in here that I've been able to find. I got one right here. Nope, I missed him. Oh, there you are. Nope. Yep. So we got to get creative about how we get them out here. No. That little crab right here, I can get you out at least. Get the little crab out. So here is a green porcelain crab. Over here with our other little crabs. All right, so now we're going to try this with a net. Maybe have a little bit more luck. There we go. We gotcha. There we go. There you go. So we're going to put a little bit of water in there just so they can keep breathing while we look at them. So you can really see that big claw. So they have one really big claw and one little claw. And that's that really big claw is what makes that snapping sound and the big air bubble. Ooh, you are fast. But I'm faster. To where my oyster bags have been resting, and I'm going to just take a look because sometimes some of those critters, they like to hang on for a minute, and oh yes, we have some critters still in here. Here is our snapping shrimp, and this is a green porcelain crab. Thought I saw, oh, here's another little crab right here. So this little guy right here, this is a little mangrove crab. He's a little tiny guy. Now I squeeze my big sucker upper here so that I create a vacuum in here when I open it back up. Can you get in here? Oh, there's a couple. Oh, goodness. Okay, hold on. Let's see if we get you. Get the sucker upper. Can we get you? So we have evidence of lots of different kinds of mollusks. The ones that I'm showing you here are bivalves. So this one is actually an oyster shell, small one. This is a clamshell. So this is evidence that there are small mollusks living in these oyster bags. And here I have another small clam or mollusk. And then of course we have also in the kingdom Mollusca, we have our snails. As you can see, these guys are trying to make a little bit of a getaway. These are periwinkle snails. So now we're going to look at how many different types of animals we got and how many of each animal type that we got. So I have in here 1, 2, 3, 4 snapping shrimp. So I'm going to write that down over here. And we found 2 snails. And we're going to count our crabs. There's a lot in here. Hold on. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 crabs. So we counted up how many crabs we have, but we actually have 2 different species in here. So when we're talking about biodiversity, it's the difference in species. So we're going to see if we can count up how many of each species we have. Now this is our green porcelain crab right here. They're kind of flat and they have these large pinchers right here. So that's 1. And let's see, this is another one, but I think there's a couple in there. Come on, you guys. Yep, look at that. There's 1, 2, 3 of them. Now this is a mangrove crab, so we'll count that as a mangrove crab. And that 1, 2, 3 mangrove crabs. That is actually a green porcelain crab. So now we have 4 green porcelain crabs. You stay over here. And 4, 5, 6. Oh, that's a green porcelain as well. So we have 6 mangrove crabs and 5 green porcelain crabs. And here's our last little mangrove crab. So now we have 7 mangrove crabs and 5 green porcelain crabs. Now you'll notice here that the green porcelain crabs' bodies are very flat. And this helps them to live in those tight little nooks and crannies in the oyster shells. Whereas the mangrove crabs, they do spend time in the water, but they will also climb up the red mangrove roots and they will hang out in the branches of the red mangrove. So sometimes you can see those crabs actually above your head when you're walking around the mangroves. Green porcelain crabs are actually an invasive species, which means they're not supposed to be here. But at this point, they are definitely part of the food chain for some of our fish. Now, we definitely do have evidence of bivalves. This one still appears to be alive, so we will count that one. All right, so now we have all of our data that we collected. So we're going to take a look at it and see what we can learn from the data that we have. What we're looking for is biodiversity. What does that mean, really? Well, bio means life and diversity means a variety, right? So we want to see if we have a variety of different species that are living in this little microhabitat. So even though we had 12 crabs, we actually had 2 species of crabs. So we look at this as 1 species, 2 species. Now the snails, they were the same, so that's a 3rd species. We only had the snapping shrimp today, so that's 4 species. And then we had that 1 mussel, and so that makes 5 species. So we had 5 different species just in these 2 tiny little bags. So restoration projects, they can sometimes take up acres, so hundreds, maybe even thousands of bags or mats that are out there. So imagine what we might find if we were to be able to look at all those different areas. And then of course our natural oyster reefs as well have a wide variety of animals that live there. So now we're going to take a look at, and we're going to see how many animals lived here. Well, we're just going to add them up, right? So we have 12 plus 2 is 14, plus 4 is 18, and then our mussel is 19. So we had 19 different animals that we found. Did we have any plant material? Do you remember the mangrove propagules and the leaves that we found? So yes, we had plant material. Let's see, what animal was most abundant? You can probably guess, right? Crabs were most abundant. But in our crabs, which one was most abundant? Our mangrove crab. You're right. All right, so now it's time to make a conclusion. Our last question here says, based on what was found, would you conclude that this habitat was healthy? So, looking at all the things that we found today, what do you think? Well, if you ask me, I think this is a healthy oyster reef habitat. And why do I think that? Right? I should have some proof. Well, we have lots of crabs for sure, but what we really have are these wonderful snapping shrimp. We don't find these all the time. The fact that they're here tells me that there's plenty of food for them to eat. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. But in addition to that, when we were collecting these bags out of the river, there were all kinds of fish swimming right over them, which tells me that there's plenty of food for those fish to eat as well. So this must be a healthy habitat if these predators are able to find the food that they need.